I certainly believe that the pandemic is the worst crisis that we have seen in the world, maybe since World War II. But it's also a crisis that has derived into a socio-economic crisis. This is a circumstance that we have tried to address in many, many forms. We expanded the ICU capacity. We were able to create a social safety net to get to 10 million households in Colombia to protect the poorest of the poor. But at the same time, we were trying to find a solution to the worst migration crisis in the world. Almost 2 million people in our soil that have come from Venezuela with frozen bones, with lack of opportunities. We had to face for the first time a hurricane category 5 in Colombian soil. There are a lot of anxieties and sentiments that have been accumulated over the last year and a half, and now it's exploding. People want to express, and some people are expressing with anger. Other people want to take a political opportunity out of chaos, or they want to be promoters of chaos. So yes, this is a crisis, and it is a crisis that has been accelerated and maybe expanded by the magnitude of the pandemic. And I think we have done to do our best, but we must do much more, and we must do it stronger. I don't think the protests are based on the tax reform. If we may look at how things have been evolving, the national strike was called even before we presented the bill before Congress. The agenda of the promoters of the strike was not dependent on the tax reform. Now, in the times we live, where fake news and misinformation moves at a faster pace than reasonability, the tax reform was misinformed, and it was used by some people to infuriate the sentiments in the streets. What the reform aimed to do was to provide cash transfers to the 50% of the Colombian population in need. It was conceived as a program so that neither the middle class nor the lowest income families would have to pay a single tax, but on the contrary, they will receive benefits that could have destroyed absolute poverty within a 3-year framework. This was the first program in Colombian history that was going to provide a basic supply of resources to more than 10 million families. And that could have made a big change. If it wasn't because of COVID-19, we would have not been calling for another fiscal reform. The reason why we called for the fiscal reform was to stabilize our finances and be able to provide resources for those social programs and be able to be aggressive in reducing poverty in Colombia. But obviously, there was a lot of misinformation. I made the call and I said, okay, let's read through it and let's try to build a proposal to protect the social safety net, because we cannot lose those programs. Those programs ought to be maintained and ought to be maintained at least until the end of next year so that we can navigate throughout the storm of the pandemic and maybe the post-pandemic by providing resources for the people that need more support. This unrest has different phases. It has the genuine phase of those who come to the streets and peacefully protest, and that is a constitutional right that we ensure, that we protect. But there are also acts of vandalism and urban terrorism that we have not only to condemn, but to face with all the capacity of the law and order forces. And there's also the phase of those who want to capitalize politically the generation of chaos. Those who have been promoted clash of classes, those who have been promoted hatred, those who are always generating fires in their expressions, and they just want to capitalize whatever chaos is created. There's also the blockades that we have seen in many roads, and that simply is a crime. It is affecting the supply of food, the supply of oxygen, the supply of vaccines. We have seen influence of armed groups in certain regions so that the blockades are done, or they try to intimidate the truck drivers who want to move along the country taking food and supplies. And the purpose behind that is that we have to, since we have to act with law and order capacities, they just want, with ambition, to see clashes between the police and the military with those groups, so that there's a mistake that is committed. And if there's a mistake that is committed that becomes lethal, then we see the next cycle, which is to destroy the credibility, the confidence, the trust, and the good name of Colombia. And I think we all as a society have to say, well, that's not the way. People that have acted with violence, the Attorney General in Colombia has already demonstrated the linkages between those groups with armed groups like the dissidencies of FARC or ELN, you name it. But also the way that fake news has been deployed around the world in social media. You clearly can see the influence of foreign governments that want to destabilize Colombia. There's no doubt. I value what President Moreno did because his intelligence was clear in saying we have seen criminal groups that have linkages with the Maduro regime. And also we know that Maduro and his cronies have always looked at Colombia as the jewel to be conquered. And that's why they want to make an influence in the election for 2022. That's why they want to move resources. That's why they want to provide support to candidates that have a vision that is shared with them. We have governed with our principles and our values. And one of those values has been zero tolerance with any conduct from a public servant or a member of the police or the army that goes beyond the Colombian Constitution. So we have been defenders of human rights, and we have always acted in terms of law and order according to the Constitution. And the Constitution of Colombia is very clear that the mayors are the law and order authorities within their municipality, and the governors are law and order agents of the president. So all the actions that have been taken to face attacks on infrastructure, attacks on public transportation, attacks on citizens, has also been supported by the national government, and none of the actions that have been implemented have gone beyond the protocols. So if there is an accusation of a member of the police that has made a wrongdoing, yes, we condemn it and we supply all the information needed so that there can be a rapid investigation. But it's also interesting to put and to highlight that the Colombian police, for example, every single year has to address more than 30 million police procedures. Now, is there abuse within 30 million procedures? Yes, there is. But it's not systemic. And if it happens, we investigate and we sanction. The same thing as it happens with a police body in the United States. If those conducts are performed that go beyond the law, in the individual cases, yes, we act and we act severely. But also more than 500 members of the police were brutally attacked by vandalism, by low-intensity urban terrorism. We saw the killing of a captain, a member of the police. He was attacked with a knife. He was attacked 17 times and he passed away. I had the possibility to speak with his wife and express my sorrow and express my sentiment. We have to be very clear that we have to reject violence in any form, notwithstanding where it comes from. And especially because we know that some of those conducts and riots and events of violence are aimed to generate a brutal confrontation, to delegitimize the work of the police. So it makes the role more complex, But I'm a true believer that the Colombian police, year over year, day over day, is embracing the highest standards to comply with their mission. Have violent protesters violated human rights? Of course. I mean, why should someone destroy the public transformation system that benefits the poorest of the poor? Why some people believe that they have to blockade so that they break the supply chain to take food to a municipality or a city? Why they want to prevent all the chemicals that are needed for water provision, water and storage in cities to get to the cities? It's because it's a sabotage operation. That's why we have to say no to every single blockade, because it's an abuse. It's not based on the law, and it is a crime. There's a broad majority of Colombians who wake up every day with the expectation of recovering what they had before the pandemic. People that want to work, people that want to study, people that want to find an opportunity. And the only way that those things can be met is with an economic recovery. The only way that those things can be met is with massive vaccination. The only way that those things can be met is to having normality in the supply chain around the country. There was a very distinguished senator from New York who was Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And there was a sentence that was attributed to Mark Twain, but he used it a lot. And is that in politics, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not to your own facts. And we are a democratically elected government with the most important turnout in Colombian history, with more than 10 million votes. How do I feel when people say that I'm a right-wing authoritarian president? Is it a right-wing authoritarian regime, a government that provides temporary protection status to more than 1.8 million migrants? While you see in the world how the extreme right uses xenophobic sentiments to refer to migration? How can a government be called authoritarian right-wing? A government that is promoting non-conventional renewable energies like no other time before in Colombia, that is promoting clean transportation, that is protecting the Amazon and the high-altitude ecosystems and the circular economy, that is making the challenge of reducing by 51% our CO2 emissions in 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. How can a government that has provided the largest budget for education ever in Colombia and has provided free public university training to the lowest income families and the middle class for free be called a right-wing authoritarian regime? For the first time in Colombian history, we have vice ministers who are openly members of the LGBTI community. And if we connect this, the investment on tertiary roads, land titling, multi-purpose cadastre, protection of minorities, we're an inclusive government. And I have always trusted in the center, and I consider myself an extreme centrist, because it's the way where we have to balance the principles of law and order with the protection of human rights, entrepreneurship with environmental commitment. Those kinds of balances are the balances that can only be made in the center. You can't make those balances if you're in the extreme right or if you're in the extreme left. Those have been my true commitments. We have governed with those principles, and we will continue to embrace those principles. When I won the election, The candidate that I defeated said that he was going to be in the streets all my term, that he was going to protest all my term, that his purpose was not to let me govern the country. That was said. So we know that for some people, this is also a political instrument. And we have to tell that to the Colombian people. And I think seeing all this situation in a pre-election year demonstrates that there's some people that in their political interest, they're not in favor of economic recovery. They're not in favor of massive vaccination. They're not in favor of attending the poorest of the poor. Because if those things happen, it weakens their speech. The Colombian economy is projected to grow above 5%. Whose interest can be against that? The interest of those who want to capitalize chaos. Who wins if there is a delay in the vaccination program? Those who want to build their political ambitions through chaos. Who could be interested in generating a massive healthcare crisis derived from a spike of new cases that have been triggered by new conglomerates of people? Those who want to grow their political ambitions through chaos. But that's not patriotic at all. That's not honorable at all. So I think it's very important that Colombians know that. Because they should elect a president in 2022 that is committed that the things that I have mentioned pass and move and are part of the reality, because we're thinking about the benefits of all society. Someone who wants to build their ascent to power through chaos, despair, frustration, that's not the kind of president Colombia needs in 2022. When I had my oath of office in August 2018, the economy was growing at 1.7%. By the end of 2019, it was growing 3.4%. We almost doubled the growth. The lowest fiscal deficit in 8 years. And for the first time in a decade, a primarily fiscal surplus. We had the best year in tourism. We had industrial growth. We had foreign direct investment coming with enthusiasm to Colombia. We were increasing formal jobs. And all those things were giving us the right motivation so that 2020 could have been a year that we could have grown above 5%. But then the pandemic came. And obviously we had an increase in the deficit, increase in debt. We had a reduction in GDP growth. We had to make all the social safety net programs. And obviously we're now seeing some of the consequences, the social consequences of the effects of the pandemic. The most challenging thing today is that recovery has started. The recession is over. We had negative growth in the second trimester 2020. We had negative growth on the third trimester 2020. We had negative growth on the fourth trimester of 2020. But now, on the first trimester of 2021, we began to grow again, 1.1%. And this is a demonstration of how resilient we are. We have now the possibility to grow in 2021 above 5%. I think we were very close to get to pre-pandemic unemployment levels. And if we get to move on growth and vaccination and at the same time open opportunities for the poorest of the poor, I think we can end 2021 with a Colombia based on a positive sentiment. It's going to be complicated in a sense that we know that we have to address social unrest, but at the same time we have to be tough on those who have acted with criminality. But I think this is the right opportunity to bring people together and be able to generate pacts regionally and nationally to address this situation. In the times we live, fake news and misinformation moves at the speed of light, while reasonable sentiments and explanations and pedagogy moves in horse. And that is something that is going to make democracy more complicated around the world, because you need to adapt reason, facts, and the possibility of building consensus at the same rapidness, velocity as fake news moves. We must act together and build together a nation that can put an end to polarization. But the issue is polarization is not just in Colombia. You have it in the United States, you have it in France, you have it in the United Kingdom. Why? Because in the politics we live, in the world we live, there are more political leaders focused on how can they make more likes than how can they make more proposals. How can they be more flashy than being more practical or reasonable? Those are the challenges that we have now, not only in Colombia, but in the world politics. We have to move faster on the arguments than the fake news does in social media. To put an end to polarization, we need to go back and build the idea of having the sentiment or the ambition for greatness and not just the ambition for popularity.